all set up, and Sue Murphy's got her video all set up, and we hope that this will be a nice little program that will help get you in the Christmas spirit. So Ed, if you'll come over here and stand right on camera here. Right on this
side of that camera, she's the one that needs to do the tripod.
This poor demented child gave me a speech to read. He thinks I'll read it. You don't have any idea what I do. I'll overplay you continually. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. Some of the words I might stumble over because they're kind of long, but I'll try to do the best I can. In observance of the Christmas season, we are going to turn the calendar back about 130 years to the time of the Civil War. Our speaker will be Professor Clement Moore from the Theology Department at Columbia University in New York City. Professor Moore is here for a religious conference in the Episcopal Church. That's hard for me to say. We are fortunate that his train arrived in time. President Lincoln has ordered many pastors' trains converted to troop trains because of the war. That would be a civil war. As I am sure most of you know, Professor Moore is well known as the author of that famous children's poem, "Was the Night Before Christmas." Please welcome Professor Moore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Winch. However, I'm 82 and I'm retired now, so my title is actually Professor Emeritus Moore. And I don't live in New York City. I moved to Newport, Rhode Island. My friends just call me Dr. Moore. Thank you. However, I am delighted to be here and take a moment off from the Episcopal Conference. And I will read that poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," to you. However, I feel that I should have a right to defend myself. That poem wasn't intended to be made public. That was entirely a private matter within my family. But things got away from me. In order to explain it, I have to take you back 49 years to the year 1813, when I was an assistant professor at Columbia University. I was 33 years old, rather nondescript young fellow. My parents insisted on having the Hudson River painters make this picture of me. I never liked it very much, but they did it anyway. And I had studied and got my doctorate in Greek languages and Greek theology. I had written my lexicon of the Hebrew language, and I was engaged in the study of Oriental literature and language and theology, which I enjoyed very much. In fact, I left my parents' mansion because it was too far from the campus. I wanted to be right down there where I could study better. My folks had Chelsea House, a large mansion at 9th Avenue, 23rd on the Hudson River. And my father, of course, the good Episcopal Bishop of New York City, wealthy, very well. I was the only son. He wanted me to take a church with him. I wasn't interested in the church. I enjoyed my studies. I hope to make full professor one of these days. Well, in order to do that, I had to take some time off occasionally and go to the faculty teas, because I had to stay in good graces with the dean of Columbia University and the dean's wife. And the president of the school might be there, and the president's wife. So, I went to one of these faculty teas that year in 1813, and I was conjugating some Greek verbs for some of the younger men. See, I'm an assistant professor, but the others are all instructors. And I was going over some of the details so that they would understand. I looked across the room, and there at the other end of the fellowship hall was the most delightful, most attractive young lady I'd ever seen in my life. What on earth was a child like that be doing And then with the old fogies, like 33, I was one of the youngest men in there. Well, I didn't pay attention. I went on conjugating the verbs and asked for more tea. Boy, that lady is waltzing across the room, and she's coming towards me. Oh, my goodness. What on earth would I say to her? Well, I hardly had time to even think about it. She was right there, looking up at me, saying, my name is Catherine Elizabeth Taylor. My friends call me Eliza, and what's your name? Dr. Clement Moore, theology, language department. She asked me about my doctorate, and I explained that, and wanted to know about my lexicon. I got out the book, and I described my Oriental studies, and I said in my spare time, I write a little poetry, but my colleagues tell me, Clement, that's stodgy stuff. Don't read any of that poetry, please. Well, this darling young creature looked up to me and she said that all poetry is beautiful, and she was certain that my poetry was just as beautiful as anyone else's. My, that was a nice thing to say. I certainly appreciated it. What, the next day, I felt kind of good about it. I wrote off a little humorous couplet, and I mailed it to her. Didn't think anything of it. That was the end of that. Well, about 2 weeks later, I received an engraved invitation in the mail. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor and daughter Eliza request the pleasure of the company. Dr. Moore, dinner at 8. If I can overlook any free meals, I certainly couldn't do that. Well, I arrived at the Moore household to find that all of the Taylor family loved poetry. And they had me read a few things from my lexicon and some of my unpublished works, and they encouraged me to write more. As it happened, this young lady, Eliza, was having her picture made about the time. And now we have photography. I was able to make a copy of it. Charming young lady. Well, she was only 19 years old. And I found that I was invited back to dinner repeatedly, and before I knew what was going on, I was propelled into a courtship situation. My goodness, I never intended for that. I intended to be made single and be a professor. And there I was, in the Taylor mansion. I'm not for sure I should try to do that, but I was on bended knee, proposing to this young lady. Oh, can you help me? I was never so much surprised in my life. She accepted. Oh, well, that was 1813. Now, this poem was written in 1822, 9 years later. And by that time, this dear young creature, now my wife, had presented me with 6 children. Margaret was 7. Charity was 6. Benjamin was 4. And Mary was 3. And Clement Jr. was 2. And Emily, well, I guess Emily was about 8 months old. By then, my good father had passed away, and I'd inherited the Chelsea house and mansion. And I asked Mother Moore to stay on, and we certainly needed the help with a family that size. And every time one of these children had a birthday, or there was a party or some occasion, Eliza would say, "I will write a poem for you." And I was writing these little poems, one after another, and I would read them to the children, and they would laugh so gaily, and then I'd crunch them out and throw them in the fireplace. Well, in 1822, little Charity, age 6, started in on me immediately after Thanksgiving. "Father dear, do you have a poem for Christmas Eve?" I'm sorry, I'm very busy. Father is now a full professor, and Father has responsibilities. But I'll try. I'll try, child. You just be a good girl. Well, every few days he kept asking. I saw a clipping in the New York Herald Tribune. My friend, the columnist Washington Irving, had written some very fanciful things about Christmas. He said that Santa Claus can fly. Can you imagine that, Santa Claus flying? He said that Santa Claus would come through the sky and come down the chimney and stop. Children put their stockings by the chimney. Santa would put a present in them. I've never heard of anything like that. Christmas is a religious occasion. Present giving is done at New Year's, of course. Well, I stuck it in my pocket, and I might get something out of it. I was in a bookstore and looking over some old books. There was a children's book. And in it, the artist had drawn a picture of Santa Claus. And he was driving a wagon with loads of presents in the wagon. And he had a horse in the wagon. That seemed like an unusual idea. No, we'll stick that in our pocket. And it was so busy, I just didn't have time to write anything. And on the morning of December 24, I woke up, and all of Manhattan Island was covered with a blanket of snow. The fields and the orchards and the farms and the barns, and the old muddy roads were covered with snow. What you might call a new fallen snow. Well, the first thing that happened that morning was my house helper, Jan Dychuk, the Dutch fellow, roly-poly fellow with his nose, very awful. He came to me and he had the latch from the garden gate. And he said, Dr. Moore, the latch's broken again. Can't fix it. And after $1 before, I'll take it to the blacksmith. I'll have a new one made. Well, I reached in and gave him that $1. And he was all smiles. And he nodded and he put his finger by his nose and he went like this. That was Jan's way of saying it would be done. He would take care of everything. Well, after he left, Eliza showed me her grocery list. She said, we're having 17 people for dinner tomorrow. And we have all the children and all the house help and the 5 slaves. I'm not going to have one of those turkeys from the Greenwich Village meat market anymore. I want the best and largest turkey on Manhattan Island. She wanted me to go all the way down to the Washington Market at Fulton and Vesey Street, practically to the Battery. It's 3 miles through the forests and the fields and the farms. And it's snow all over the place, and it's still snowing. Oh, she said Patrick will not wagon. And if Santa could pull a wagon or a sleigh or something like that through the sky, you know, I don't think a horse would be very good. Let's have reindeer. We'll need lots of reindeer. I'll think of some names for reindeer. Well, then, this Santa Claus character. Now, I knew that the children learned in school that he was based on the Dutch St. Nicholas. And I recall stories about St. Nicholas. I couldn't remember what St. Nicholas looked like. I don't think anyone ever painted any pictures of him. He was a small man, always smiled, roly-poly, very generous fellow. Well, that sounded a little bit like our houseman, Jan Dychuk. Now, wouldn't that be amusing if our houseman, Jan, turned out to be Santa Claus? So, I wrote and wrote, and as we finally got home in the late afternoon, I had 28 verses. But I wasn't satisfied with it. The meter was off in some spots and it needed some polishing and some work, so I went in the living room and sat by the fire and I changed some words around and polished and smoothed the story out. One of the slave girls came in and they didn't time. I just ignored her, I was busy. Another slave girl came in and said, dinner is served. I didn't pay any attention to it. Clement? Oh, that's Eliza. We do not ignore Eliza. So we went to the dinner table, and there was little Charity standing by the table saying, Father dear, do you have a poem for tonight? Well, my child, perhaps I do. We will see. Sit down and eat your dinner, and we'll see what happens. The children all behaved themselves and were good as gold. We went into the living room, everyone settled themselves, and I got out my notes and I got all the verses in order, and I just read the poem. Of course, little Clement Jr. fell asleep, but the other stayed awake, and they laughed and giggled a little bit, and when I got done, I crunched up the poem, and I was about to throw it in the fire. And Charity said, Father dear, please read it again. Well, all right. I read the poem one more time, and Eliza wanted me to pick up Clement Jr. and carry him upstairs and help put the babies to bed. I did that. And a couple days later, I saw the poem laying there, and I picked it up and I threw it in the fireplace. That took care of that. Well, the following year, 1823, just before Christmas, somebody sent me a copy of the Troy, New York Sentinel newspaper. And there on page 1 is my poem. All 28 verses. Every word. Now, where on earth did that newspaper get my poem?
I'm sorry.
Fortunately, they had it author anonymous. I certainly appreciate that, because after all, I am now a full professor of theology. I couldn't have my name associated with anything as materialistic as a children's poem. It lacked the true spirit of the occasion. But I wanted to know how this all happened, and I started questioning our guests and the members of the family, and it all came back to my little daughter, Charity, age 6. Charity's had a house guest. Her friend Harriet Butler from Troy, New York, was visiting over the holidays. And those two little children got a hold of that poem, and they copied it word for word. And Harriet took it back to Troy, New York. Her father, the rector of the Episcopal Church, happened to get a hold of it, and he's the one who took it to the newspaper. But thank goodness that my name wasn't associated. But in 1824, I opened my New York Herald Tribune, and there's my poem again. They printed it, they were giving out copies, and all the papers printed it. It was being printed all over the United States. And after a few years, a rumor started to circulate that some prominent professor at Columbia University had written that poem. It took them 15 years to figure it out. And they finally found out that Dr. Moore of Columbia University had written that poem. Well, I hoped that I would go down in the annals of literature or my lexicon of the Hebrew language. However, it's been practically forgotten now, and everybody wants to hear that poem. So I had to accommodate them. I was in the bookstore this morning, Wilson Robinson's bookstore on South Howard Street, and they are selling copies of it. The whole book with nothing but my poem. Can you imagine? Well, at age 82, it's getting difficult for me to do this by memory because I tend to get my Donners and Blitzens mixed up. So, if you will indulge me, I will read it from the text as I found it this morning in the good bookstore. Yes. Let me find the spot here. It'll just take me a moment to get there. Yes. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were all nestled, all snug in their beds. Oh, visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for our long winter snack. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of new fallen snow gave the luster of midday to objects below. When what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Bounder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. Well, now this next verse, I'm not going to read it. I didn't get a chance to get this finished properly. And the analogy is poor and the meter isn't right. Some people I know have got this memorized, so you'll know what it is. I will go on from there and spare myself the embarrassment. So, up to the housetops, the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof, prancing and pawing of each little hoof. And as I drew in my head, I was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he just looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled. His dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses. His nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow. The beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of his pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke that encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly, and he shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, and then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team, gave a whistle, and away they all flew, like the down of a thistle. And I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you and do that.
He does. He goes around on Christmas.
And I have 2 guests here, Neil and Carol Beal. And Carol is a retired teacher from Springfield Roosevelt Elementary School. And when we first started doing children's historical acting programs, we did the first one in her class, and she helped me learn how to do it.
Thanks for letting us share your...
Is there anyone?
I think you need a tripod more than I did. You need a tripod more than I did.
Okay, well, we'll look around and see if we can find it. Thank you.